America with AAPIs, and welcome to AAPIs' Legislative Leadership Series conversation with AAPIs in the C-suite. Today, we are proud to present a conversation with AAPI executives from across a variety of companies to discuss their journeys to their current roles, as well as the importance of representation in positions of decision-making power. A special thank you to our sponsors for this panel, Amazon Web Services, AmerisourceBergen, General Motors, and Salesforce. We appreciate your support of this important conversation and of AAPIs. Before we begin our discussion today, we have a special video welcome from Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy from Florida's 7th District. Congresswoman Murphy is a member of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or CAPAC, and currently serves on the influential House Ways and Means Committee. As a Vietnamese American woman myself, I am proud to see her as the first Vietnamese American woman to serve in Congress and the first woman to ever represent Florida's 7th Congressional District. Finally, Congresswoman Murphy is also an honorary co-chair of our Legislative Leadership Series, our panel series that includes this conversation and many others. While Congresswoman Murphy is unable to join us live today, we appreciate her sending remarks via video to introduce today's panel.
Hi, it's Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy from Florida's 7th Congressional District. I'm sorry we couldn't meet in person this year and that votes are keeping me from joining you all live today. As an honorary co-chair of AAPIs Legislative Leadership Series, I want to welcome you all to today's panels, AAPIs in the C-suite. Today, you'll be hearing from some incredible leaders in the private sector who will share with you their stories of perseverance, overcoming adversity, and reaching success in their respective fields. It's clear each of them have blazed a path for fellow AAPI people to follow, and that's truly commendable. As someone who worked in the private sector before coming to Congress, I can tell you that the skills I learned as a former businesswoman helped me become a stronger public servant. My experience in the private sector also made me see that AAPIs are severely underrepresented at the highest levels of corporate leadership. I have always said that our government should reflect the rich diversity of our country, and I deeply believe that is to be true of the private sector as well. Last week, a review by the New York Times of more than 900 officials and executives in prominent positions found that only about 20% identify as Asian, Black, Hispanic, Native American, multiracial, or otherwise a person of color. And when the data was broken down even further, fewer than a quarter of the most valuable public companies are run by people of color. While our community is so proud to see AAPI CEOs running renowned companies like Microsoft, Adobe, and Alphabet, it's clear there's still so much work to do to ensure that more people of color, particularly women of color, can rise to powerful positions. As our country becomes increasingly diverse, we have seen businesses begin to take steps in the right direction by recruiting talent that more closely reflects the diversity of this country. But there's still more to be done to increase the number of diverse leaders in the private sector. AAPIs can provide a unique perspective to a variety of issues that affect this country, whether it's supporting innovation, creating jobs, promoting social justice, or achieving healthcare equity. By amplifying AAPI success stories like the ones you'll hear today, we communicate to younger AAPI people that they too can someday start their own company or sit at the head of a boardroom table. And that makes me incredibly proud to be part of the AAPIs family. Thank you all for holding this critical conversation, and most of all, thank you for your support of AAPIs. Stay safe, be well.
We're so glad that Congresswoman Murphy was able to share her thoughts with you all today, and we thank her for taking the time to do so. We have an amazing lineup of panelists and a lot to talk about in this short time together. So I'm thrilled to get us started by introducing today's moderator, Linda Akutagawa. Linda is the president and CEO of Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics, also known as LEAP, a passionate social entrepreneur for over 25 years and beneficiary of LEAP's leadership programming. She is a believer in the value and urgent need for diverse, equitable, and inclusive leadership. Through LEAP, Linda has dedicated herself to continuing the cycle of leadership development and inspiring Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to step up to leadership roles across sectors, industries, and communities. She is a commissioner on California's 2020 Citizens Redistricting Commission, as well as an appointed member of the California Department of Insurance Diversity Task Force and chair of the Alliance for Board Diversity. Linda is also a member of the Asian American Institute Advisory Board at California State University at Los Angeles and a board member of the Asian Pacific Planning and Policy Council. She is a nationally recognized speaker and facilitator on leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion, nonprofits, and board governance. We are so thrilled she could join us to moderate this conversation today. As a reminder, for those joining us on Facebook, please put your questions in the comment section. And if you're joining the webinar, please use the Q&A chat box feature. Linda, I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Madeline, and thanks for having me, and thanks for to all of you who are here for this wonderful, what will be, I know, a wonderful conversation with these really awesome leaders. And just so that we don't use up too much time, let's get right into the conversation. So first off, I want to briefly introduce our speakers, and I'm not going to read off their bios because their stories are going to come out during the course of the conversation that we'll be having, but I do want to just briefly introduce them. So first off, we have John Chow, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for AmerisourceBergen.
It's just interrupt, it's Chu, John Chu.
Okay, I knew that I should have asked you because it's always the simplest ones that always are the ones that sometimes that I'll get wrong. I was telling the others that I was practicing Swami's last name.
It's actually okay. At my high school graduation, my college graduation, actually at an Asian American Bar Association recognition of general counsel, my name was mispronounced. So you're in good company.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that I didn't ask you beforehand. I knew I should have. I guess lesson learned for anybody who's going to be doing moderation as well too, just to make sure you ask, even when you think it's obvious. Okay, so I did not ask this next one, but hopefully I will say it correctly. So our next panelist is Sam Chung, who is Executive Vice President of Finance and Strategy at Salesforce. Got it right? All right. Yep. All right.
Great job.
All right, awesome. Next up is someone that I've known for a long time and actually a former board member of LEAP and very much a supporter, I think probably well known to many in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Susan Jin Davis, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer for Comcast NBC Universal. Susan, welcome, glad to see you here as part of this conversation. And next up is Swami, Sivas, Subramanian, who is Vice President of AI and Machine Learning at Amazon Web Services. Thank you very much for being here. I hope I did pronounce your name correctly.
Yeah.
I always tell people, it's the length that always gets people because my last name is long. So I always tell people whenever they apologize for mispronouncing, and I said, it's okay, I understand, it's the length. I have problems too. So not with my name, but with other people's names. So
that's same here. Appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Matt Chen, who's the Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of General Motors and President of GM Ventures. Welcome to everyone who is here for this wonderful conversation around AAPIs in the C-suite. And I think this is a conversation that many of us have had. It's a conversation that I'm sure is not going to be the last time we'll have, but I think this is also one of those kind of conversations that there's oftentimes a lot of mystery around in terms of how do you get to where you are based on, the organizations that you're working in. And so the first question, this is a question that I want to ask of all of you, and just so everybody who's listening in, just so that we can also get to know each person individually as well too. I have specific questions that I'm going to be asking each panelist, but at times I'm going to have a question that I'm going to want all of them to answer. And so I want to start this panel off with this question for the entire group. And as we're all, Asian American, Pacific Islander here in this conversation here, I think this is something that comes up a lot for a lot of others who may be listening in. So I've asked you to reflect on the kind of values or the messaging that you got growing up as a child, the experiences that you've had that you would attribute to your being of Asian heritage, Asian or Pacific Islander heritage. And so I want to ask you, how does it influence the way you lead? And I ask this because I think it's important for those who are listening to understand that our Asian culture, our heritage, our identity, our values are not things to be ashamed of. And it would be wonderful for you to share, something very briefly about how do you lead, thinking about all of those parts of you but the parts that you especially draw on from being Asian American and Pacific Islander. Let's go ahead. Let's start with Sam.
Thanks, Linda. First of all, I just want to take a moment to say how excited I am to be part of this amazing panel and to get to share my experiences along with the rest of these esteemed colleagues. It's just such an inspiring moment for me personally to know that this is an area of focus and that we're investing in our community in this particular way. So thank you very much for the chance to share my story and to try and give back however I can. I am a Korean American. My parents grew up in the face of the Korean War in the middle of the 20th century. My father actually was displaced and had to move to South Korea from the north. My mother was one of five daughters of a single mother whose husband was a prisoner of war during the Korean War. So you can just imagine the kind of trials and the adversity and the hardship that they experienced earlier on in their lives. And they moved to the U.S. much like many of us, right, to live the American dream and to find a better future for their children and for their future descendants. And against all odds, they really were very successful. They had to deal with language issues, they had to deal with economic issues, with social issues. And the values that I learned from them is really kind of what very aligned to what Congresswoman Murphy said around the idea of perseverance, resiliency, and the ability that you can overcome really any obstacle that you have in front of you. And really, I can't think of a more appropriate time in today's work environment for those values to really be at the heart of what people come back to. I've never seen as much volatility in the global economy than what's happened in the first half of this particular year. We were just talking about, the experience, not just COVID, but, here in the West Coast, we're dealing with other natural disasters. We have wildfires, we have smoke, you name it. Like, it just seems like 2020 is throwing everything they possibly can at all of us to really test our mettle and test what we can accomplish and what we can do. And this is, I think, really important for us to kind of come back to, and to come back to the values that I learned and that we all learned through our culture and through our parents and through other people that are aligned to our community. And personally, I always find myself in situations where, actually I'm much attracted to those situations where there are those challenges, because I look back at the experiences that my parents had and that I had as a younger person, and I feel myself really kind of, in some ways, kind of ironically attracted to really difficult, challenging situations, because I do think it really helps bring out my strengths. And it brings out the opportunity for me to leverage what I've learned in my past to really help lead and to execute and to be successful in the future. So I think this is actually a really, in some ways, just another opportunity for us to really double down on the values that we've all learned and that we've grown accustomed to with our culture.
Great, thank you very much. And I really enjoyed hearing that, because I think, especially in this kind of time of just really a lot of change, I mean, it's really nice to hear that we can draw upon what we grew up learning from our families and really realize that it's something that we can embrace to be more successful in this kind of environment. Matt, I'm going to turn to you for this, for this question around, how do you lead and how do you draw upon your Asian culture and values?
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. And also, I'm very, very pleased to be part of this panel and have an ability and opportunity to hear from other panelists, as well as maybe share some of my lessons from the past. When I reflect back upon my upbringing, actually, I came from a Chinese American family, actually Chinese family. I was the first in our family to immigrate to the United States. But we grew up all over the world and had many, many different sort of cultural experiences along the way, many different challenges. And I think one of the strong lessons I learned as growing up is the ability to adapt, the ability to be very agile in varying circumstances, to look for the positive whenever we encounter something that was very different. And I think that sense of positivity, that sense of agility has really played well along in terms of my career, and especially in the current role that I'm in as the CTO for General Motors. We're looking at the future. We're looking at possibilities that innovation could bring. we're looking at venture companies, startups, and opportunity to support those companies at the same time supporting our business objectives. So I think the sense of positivity, the sense of agility, the lifelong sort of interest in learning, I think those are some of the strong attributes that I think I carried from my heritage that's really served me very well, and hopefully will continue to serve a company well.
Well, I love that. I love especially the agility and the positivity parts too. And I think that that's all things that we're probably drawing upon a lot right now amongst everybody else who's also listening in as well too. I'm going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to go to Susan, and let's hear from Susan in terms of this question. And I know that there's a lot that you've shared in the past with other groups, and I think this would be great for this group to hear too.
It's really great to be here. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Madeline. I love what Sam and Matt talked about. I'm going to add as opposed to just mimic what they say, because I am 100% in agreement with what they talked about. So some additional things I got from being who I am includes a sense of confidence and self-pride. You know, I've told this story before. We grew up in a very, we didn't have diversity in the town we grew up in. And so we were often ridiculed and made fun of and harassed and so forth. And we would bring these stories back to my mother, and she would always say, what they say to you doesn't matter because you're Korean. You're better than them. And I would be like, that doesn't really help me in this scenario. But it did ultimately help me, because she was right. Others don't define me, don't define us. We define ourselves, and we need to be proud of the deep and amazing history and heritage that we hail from. And that I have learned to take advantage of in terms of, you know, create a confidence level around who I am. The second is everything was around family and community. There was no such thing as me. And that translates really nicely into the ability to build teams, the ability to collaborate with others, to partner with others, to see something bigger than yourself in whatever project or whatever initiative you're doing, because none of us can be successful alone. So family community translated really well for me into how do I build a team? How do I create a team? How do I create a culture of inclusivity? Thirdly, of course, it's the work ethic, right? The tireless work ethic, never stop working. And how that's translated for me is I am willing to continue to work and get my hands dirty, no matter what level I find myself in. And I think for my team, I'm hoping that tells them that I'm as willing to work as hard as I'm asking them to work, that we're in it together. And that work ethic does not matter what level you're at. I'm there. I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm there with them. And so those are three other examples of how the way I was brought up translated into things that I'm doing in business and have really helped me. Now, I only really came to this knowledge recently. And so I'm hoping that this panel and all of us talking to people about this helps us all as AAPIs to really unleash those things purposefully and to really use them to our advantage, because they're very, very important and they're real assets.
Thanks so much, Susan. And I really appreciate what you just said about having not only that pride, but more that confidence in who we are too. And those kind of lessons learned about how you were able to take what you were taught by your family, and particularly your mom. I just love what she said to you. And to really think about how this translates in the workplace as well too. Swami, let's hear from you, and would love to hear how you've been able to really utilize your Asian culture and heritage to lead.
Yeah, so very excited to be here and very already inspiring to hear from my fellow panelists. So just for some background, so I grew up in southern part of India from a city called Chennai. So my parents were, they went to high school, and my dad went to graduated high school, and my mom didn't finish high school. So we were kind of, my brother and I were the first to even graduate from college. So if I were to reflect on what actually, I guess my parents used to tell me, I mean, three major things. One, my dad, more than anyone, felt immensely the value of education. he said, I couldn't afford one, but he kind of, he couldn't afford one, but he said, there is one thing you can never, nobody can ever take away from you. That is the importance of education and constant learning. So maybe I overcompensated by going and doing a PhD, and still probably, I might still do a few more in the background. So I think, but that one was a big one. And then I echo what I heard from Susan. The second one was the importance of hard work and not expecting immediate results or instant gratification. So this is something, kept saying, it doesn't matter if you didn't get the results what you want. Then what matters is how much work you put in it, and have you done everything you can to do it. That's a very important lesson that even it applies in a corporate setting, where we don't actually just work on things that matter in the short term, but that plays out well in the long-term strategy as well. Third one, more than anything else, is something I guess was around the impact, the importance of empathy and humility. So this is something where it doesn't matter who you actually taught to treat others the same way you like to be treated, was something my mom would constantly kind of instill right from there. It can be on any setting. So especially as we lead organizations of thousands of people, setting that culture of empathy and humility is also an important one, along with actually setting a culture of constant learning, where just because you actually graduated from college and then working in a corporate environment, doing your day job, doesn't mean you stop learning. You're constantly learning and reinventing yourself on behalf of your customers. So that's one of the key things we kind of embody, even in like Amazon, where we have like one of our leadership principles is learn and be curious, where we constantly ask ourselves, saying like, what did we actually learn something new this year? And that we are constantly reinventing ourselves. So these are some of the key things I kind of take as a takeaway per se from what I grew up listening from the early days.
Yeah, this is great, and I especially, I think it's important in hearing. I don't think that there's going to be someone out there that didn't say that their families probably told them to get a good education and to study hard and to work hard and all that too. But I think it was really great what you said about applying it in the workplace around constant learning. And I like also what you said about, even though it's about Amazon, I think this is something that all of us can take away too, is constantly being curious and how do we continue to grow, develop, and reinvent ourselves too. So thank you for that. So I want to just have John to finish this part up in terms of this question. And John, I know it may feel like everybody else may have said everything you wanted to say, but that's okay, because I think hearing, your story and how do you lead from what you've been taught, I think is important for all of us to also hear and I think take inspiration from too. So.
Thanks, Linda. And like all of the panelists, it's really a pleasure to be on this panel. I'd actually have a shout out to my colleagues from AmerisourceBergen Government Relations who actually signed me up for this panel. So I actually appreciate it. Just a little background about me. My parents came to the US from China a long time ago, right after World War II. And they came to attend university and with the intention of studying science or engineering and returning to China to help rebuild. And then they were part of a generation of people who ended up staying, sort of being stuck in the US, so to speak, when the Communist Revolution occurred in China in 1949, and then ended up staying. But they always, I think, were a little bit felt as if they had their feet in both places because they never really intended to stay in the US permanently. And I think as a result, they really turned their attention over time to their children, me and my brother and sister, and sort of lived through us, which is, I think, a fairly typical thing for immigrants, but especially in their case where everything they hoped to achieve, they ended up not being able to achieve, and they really were reliant on their children to sort of live out their dreams. I actually thought it was a great question. You know, what about your upbringing, your culture affects your leadership style? Because it really caused me to even try to parse through, well, what's culture, what's nature versus nurture, what's sort of part of my personality, what's from my upbringing. And I ultimately came up with three, which really overlap with what Susan talked about, what Swami talked about, really what everyone's talked about. But maybe I'll add a new one, but I'll just echo first, definitely I think hard work is something that most of us were raised, and not just hard work, but just really an expectation of hard work. The second is definitely the theme of the importance of the group, the family, versus individual. And then I think the final for me was a very strong sense of obligation that, you're out there not just to do for yourself, but you have an obligation to take your talents to really do something to make the family proud, to make the world better. And again, just the sense of obligation. And it's not just about fun. How do I translate that into leadership? I think, clearly hard work is something you want to instill. Hopefully I try to do it a little better than my father did, lecturing and hectoring, try to do it in a positive way. In terms of team, I do think that my upbringing really impacted my thinking about really wanting the group to get the credit, to make sure that the group gets credit. And I think that people appreciate that. People appreciate that you're not out for yourself, but you're really trying to uplift the team, the organization. And then finally, I think obligation. I realize that that's just instilled in me, and I have a real sense of personal responsibility. That's how I would translate it as sort of a organizational dynamic. And I definitely try to instill that again, hopefully in a positive way with my folks. But it clearly is there, because I often have people tell me it's sort of interesting in a work setting. They'll say, "Well, I didn't want to disappoint you. I didn't want to disappoint you. I wanted to get this right." But I think that's great in a way. You want your team to feel like a family, to feel like you're all rowing in the same direction, and ultimately for them to feel so dedicated that they don't want to disappoint you. I think that's a good thing.
Great. John, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question based on something that you just said, and I know that this wasn't one of the questions that I prepped you with, but I feel like it's something that so many AAPIs struggle with, and that's what you were just saying about making sure that the group gets the credit. And I think that's probably something that many people have heard and have talked about, that I don't want it to be about me. I want the group to get the credit, but in doing so, they get no recognition either. And so can you speak about how do you balance it about being about others and the group getting the credit, but also so that you don't completely get ignored either?
Sure, that's a great question. I think that for me at least, I was born in the U.S., so there's a part of me that's very, very American. There's a part of me that's probably my personality that's very competitive. There's a part of me that is very driven to achieve, and there's a part of me that's just human nature that wants to be recognized for doing a good job. So I think that I'm very aware of making sure that I'm not discounted. I'm I'm very aware, or I've been earlier in my career, of making sure that if I did something, that if I wasn't being recognized, that I got appropriate recognition, sort of a, I'll call it an early APA version of leaning in. But, you know, certainly, I think at my stage where I don't have to worry about recognition, just really focusing on team, I think is something that makes me a better leader. But, you know, definitely I think being careful about not playing into that, you know, that theme that sometimes comes out of our cultures, you know, don't stand out too much. You know, I think that's definitely something that I think all of us through our personalities, I'm sure, you know, have advocated for ourselves over the course of our careers.
Yeah, and I think that self-advocacy is also an important part. And thank you for addressing that. I think that was really important. I would like to actually turn this next question to Swami, partly because we're also getting this question as well too, in terms of from the group. Someone has asked about you know, the kind of the pathway to leadership for someone who's a young, you know, Asian American, you know, out there, how, you know, making that kind of move from, I'm going to say, from an individual contributor to a manager, and then from a manager to getting into the C-suite. Can you speak about your journey and just what's some kind of thoughts and tips, advice that you would give to this group that's on the call now?
Sure. Just in some context about me. So I joined Amazon 15 years ago as an intern. And one of my internship project at that time when I joined was we were actually essentially we had some major issues around scaling our underlying database infrastructure. Sparing the technical details, when I joined, I was asking the basic question and saying, like, why are we actually using these old database technologies? Why can't we build one and for ourselves to meet our needs? And normally, arguably, many companies would say, you're an intern, why can't you actually pick up something and move on? Instead, I mean, credit goes to Amazon and my managers and mentors. They said, if you think you can actually build on, what would it look like? What is the benefit? What is that? How would you go about it? And they asked me to actually articulate the thoughts and go on to actually show how we can build it. So they enabled me to actually go and build what turned out to be DynamoDB, which now Amazon, the database that all of Amazon runs on, let alone actually lots of our Amazon Web Services customers. But the key aspect of the lessons of that learning is, I mean, the big ideas can come from anywhere, and we as leaders need to first enable a culture of accepting creativity from anyone. But on the flip side, as an individual, the onus is on us to communicate clearly. First, speak up, and then second one is communicate clearly, because ideas, unless they are actually communicated crisply to leadership on why does this matter, how would you go about it, and then convince them, it won't actually really see the light of the day. And this, I mean, every company might have different procedures, but Amazon, we are a very written culture. We don't use PowerPoint. So we write like 6-page memos and narratives. So I wrote similar ones, and actually we sit and review with leadership teams, and actually they give feedback, and then we agree on a decision, and then we are done. We actually go and implement it. So the importance of actually crisp communication was an important one early on to actually show success. After that, some point when moving to being a manager, especially when you come from an engineering background, as an engineer, you're day in and day out, you mostly focus on how to do things. But as a manager, one of the first things you have to worry about is it's not about what about you anymore. It's about the people that you're managing on the team. And second one is the concerns around how goes away. And the concerns should be around what are we doing as a team? And then who is going to do what? So you will start moving from how to, what and who. And then as you actually continue to move up in terms of your responsibility and so forth, even you end up focusing a lot more about the question around what are we actually doing to delight customers? What should our strategy be? And the time horizon changes. So again, the crispness and thought process and the ability to work backwards from customers in terms of intensely, constantly focusing on customers and working backwards were some of the key things I have learned. Specifically, what I would recommend to new managers are that nobody likes a micromanager. I mean, nobody likes to be micromanaged. Especially leaders who are actually moving from an individual contributor to manager, they should first stop worrying about telling people how to do things, because you shouldn't hire smart people and then tell them precisely, this is what I want you to do. You shouldn't view your team as an extension of you. You should view it as your job is to enable them to do amazing things and remove the blockers from them. So, and then that responsibility, then as you further move up, then your job is to actually kind of teach your leaders on how to set a culture where you're fostering innovation and you're enabling creativity and leaders to achieve great things. So these are probably the few stages of personal growth I went through as an environment. And I would probably say, I liked, at least having been in Amazon as my complete corporate career, I found the Amazon leadership principles around customer obsession being number one, to actually also being curious all the time, along with diving deeper, like really important ones to kind of get your strategy straight, and also mentorship and development as well. So hope that kind of gives some color.
Thanks. No, that was really helpful, because I think a lot of times people ask about how did you get from point A to point basically Z, going from, like, if you're a new employee or, just a young professional, to now, okay, how do you enter the C-suite, without really thinking about all the steps in between. And I think that that's also really important too, in terms of understanding that there is a transition from one level to the next, and thinking strategically in those ways is also helpful as well too. And thinking along those lines, Susan, I want to ask you a question, because I feel like this, again, going back to the kind of things that Asian Americans oftentimes face or are asked, I think that one of the things that has happened to a lot of AAPIs is, when they get passed over, is they lack presence. And I will say that, when I hear that, it just drives me nuts, because it's like, what is presence, right? And how do you judge whether somebody has presence or not? And so, can you speak about that a little bit? Tell us, like, what is presence to you? What are the indicators, and what's some recommendations that you would have for this group to really think about developing their executive presence?
So it's an interesting point. I mean, I would say that perception may be in fact informed by bias. And that's a whole nother panel that we should have at some point, that people who look like us don't have the presence, aren't leadership material. That's one topic. The way I would answer it, however, is it is absolutely important that you do have a presence. And that presence can only be cultivated if people actually know what all your hard work is resulting in. So yes, you must work hard. Yes, you must contribute and create results, but people need to know that you are doing that. So finding a way to have visibility is incredibly important. And the way you find visibility and hence have the presence that people will notice and rise above the radar screen is, number one, if you have sponsors, if you have people who are invested in your careers, who are above you, who have status, who have gravitas, who can endorse you and can push you up and can push you forward, get you visibility. That is one way. The second way is, communication skills. It helped me get visibility and move up, and it's helping me be a better leader where I am, because it even becomes more important as you become a leader that you are a good communicator. more on that in a minute. That ability to communicate your worth, what you have done, self-promotion is really important. This is very different than bragging. This is about talking about what you can do and what you have done. So in the situations that I've been in, is I have been in front of executives where I have said, this is a job I think I would like to do. Here's why I can do it. I've done the following things. I have the following skills that will translate well to this job. To be able to articulate those things are around having presence and around having confidence and around making sure people know who you are and what you can do. But it's not enough. You also have to have that echo chamber. You have to have others that endorse you and support you. And then in terms of once you do reach a certain level at all of our levels, communication becomes continuously important for a number of reasons. Number one, for you to show leadership what your team is doing. Number two, what you can do to show your leaders what your team members are doing, individual team members. And thirdly, therefore, what your leadership is doing via the results of your team and your team members. So communication remains important for you to be able to clearly and concisely talk your value and speak your value with regard to the team that you're on and the team members that you have under you with endorsement. So I think all those things to me have helped me to create that kind of presence that's necessary to move up in an organization. Linda, I think you're muted.
Thanks, Susan. I have noise sometimes going on behind me, so thanks for sharing that. And it's interesting to me. I mean, I think one of the things I want to point out that I'm hearing quite a bit from what each of you have said so far is really the importance of communication and those communication skills. But you also touched upon having those supporters, the sponsors, and sometimes it can also start from mentors as well too. So what I want to do is I want to go to actually not only that, sponsors, but before you get to the sponsors, how do you attract them? So Matt, I want to ask you a question about personal branding. And I think this kind of builds upon what Susan was just talking about, executive presence. But, I think the kind of the topic of each of us having a personal brand has probably either directly or indirectly been discussed. And when you think about personal branding, what would you speak about around being authentic to who you are, and also how can you convey that authenticity in the form of your personal brand?
Yeah, so great question, Linda. I think personal branding is extremely important. Unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, Asian Americans included, people don't learn about the importance of personal branding until mid-career. And oftentimes they have a missed opportunity. So I think, when it comes to Asian Americans, I think there is this sort of cultural root, if you will, around hard work, really the sense of humility. Let others recognize you for what you've done, but don't really go out and tout what you've done. I think that there is certainly that sort of legacy, which has led to, I think, what Susan called, this sort of bias that exists. I think it's our role really to overcome that bias. It's our role as we mentor others to, remind them that, they have a responsibility to themselves to really sort of overcome that bias. And I think what really begins to build your personal brand really still starts with a foundation of truly hard work, contributing, generating results, not selling yourself. Your brand is really, it needs to be built on a foundation that is solid. And the only way to build that solid foundation is by truly putting in the hard work, learning from your mentors, learning from experience. But at the same time, when you do, generate an accomplishment, to make sure that others do recognize it, make sure that you are confident in terms of communicating what you've been able to do, the contributions you've been able to make. And I think over time, as you build that, experience base, that legacy of accomplishments, the network that you've created over time, that's when your brand really comes into sort of full development, if you will. But personal brand, I think something that's quite important. And it really is something that I think every individual needs to take responsibility for, needs to own.
Thank you for sharing that. So I will say that there's a number of questions that are coming in. I'm gonna start. Susan, this is addressed directly to you. Someone has asked, how did you learn to communicate so well?
So, I mean, that's another part of my upbringing that I think I bring to the workplace, and that is that many of us from a very young age were required to communicate on behalf of our family. And so from a young age, I was brought to, meetings with landlords to help my uncle get a lease. My dad would drag me to a school to register my cousins. My mother was often asked me to call this, this person or that person, that company, to resolve a billing dispute. So from a young age, I was put in a position to have to communicate for others. And I remember being irritated and burdened by it at the time, because I was like, why can't you just do it? But that was the problem, is that English was a second language for them. They struggled with that. And even when they did try, I can't understand you. You need to learn how to speak English better. I mean, these are the things I heard my parents be subjected to. It's humiliating to them. So I realized that early on, that despite how irritating it was to me, because I'd rather be playing, I'd rather be doing something myself with my friends, that I really understood at an early age that this was the situation that was presented to my parents and my family, that this was the stain of being an immigrant in this country. And that if I could do something to alleviate that, then I was going to do it. And that gets back to the family and the community and the sense of obligation to be part of a bigger thing than yourself. What I didn't know at the time was I was honing skills that would ultimately benefit me when I grew up and I became, a member of the working world. And I didn't really realize that I had been doing it all along. And so I think it comes from that. It comes from having to talk for others early on and figuring out the best words to use. It comes from having to pretend I was confident in front of adults and act as if I knew what I was talking about, right? Performing. It came from that training that I got as a child of immigrants. And so I think a lot of us probably don't realize that is an untapped thing that we do. Because sometimes I see people clam up at the workplace. I see them at their family barbecues and they won't stop talking, and they're very outgoing, and they come to work and they clam up and they're quiet. So, translate the things that you've grown up doing all your life. Multitasking, being good at solving problems, being resilient, being a good communicator, bring all of that to the workplace, because you've been doing that your whole life. And I think I learned that looking backwards. I'm telling those of you who are young people attending this event, learn it now and tap into it, because I am telling you, it really is helpful to you. And it is something unique to being an Asian American and a child of immigrants.
Thank you for saying that. And I think that that's a good reminder. And Susan, I don't know if it wasn't until you really started thinking about all the lessons learned growing up that you were able to make those connections. But perhaps, it's a good reminder to everybody, think about your early childhood kind of experiences where maybe like you, they were doing similar things, and how do you then use that to then draw upon those skill sets to then use in the workplace. And I think that's what I'm hearing from all of you talking about, is that those early lessons learned. There are so many kinds of things that have trained us for these opportunities. Now it's just being able to make that switch and say, I have it. I just never thought about connecting it to the work that I'm doing. So we're continuing to get a lot of questions. And so I'm going to start asking some of the questions that the audience is asking. And I think that this seems to be there's kind of two parts to this, because I got two different kinds of versions of this question. So one is, and I'm going to ask this of all of you, because this is kind of more of an industry question. what are you seeing in terms of within your industries and your companies, efforts to establish pipelines for young APIs to eventually make their way up into the C-suite? Can you speak to the kind of efforts that either A, your company, or B, within your industries that you're seeing? And then specifically also within that, what is your company's commitment to diversity and inclusion? That was a question that was asked. And I would, to me, I think if your companies have pipeline efforts for diverse employees, you know, specifically what is being done for APIs. So perhaps, Sam, we could start with you on this question.
Sure, thanks. And before I answer, Susan, I just want to take a moment to just come back to the last point you just made. And I think so much of what I personally have witnessed with other AAPIs is this an issue with confidence. And it's an issue with saying, okay, well, do I actually have the skills? But you know, I think it really is about reflection, and it's really about using all of the things that have happened in your life up to this point to really give you that sense of confidence that you can continue to overcome those challenges in the future. And I just love that philosophy, and so I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for sharing that with the rest of the community. You know, I work at Salesforce. I find myself very, very fortunate. I think I work at one of the most progressive, the most inclusive companies in the world. I think part of that is due to the industry that I'm a part of and that Swami is a part of, and technology. Part of it is also because of our founder, Mark Benioff, and the culture that he's instilled in the organization. But I think the biggest part of it is really about the 55,000 employees that have all really embraced the idea of equality, embraced the values of diversity and inclusion. You know, we have, like Swami said at AWS, we have, you know, stated values that are important for our company. For us, it's about trust, growth, innovation, and equality. And so equality is one of the 4 most important values. It's really a guiding principle by which we make every decision in this organization. And I'm just really impressed and very proud to be part of Salesforce, because I think we have done a lot to really make a difference in the area of diversity and inclusion. And it really all starts with, how do you understand where you are right now? Well, what is the data that you can provide out to your organization to understand today? Where do you stand? What are your statistics around your employee composition and demographics? How do you think through investments that you're making into you know, your organization, investing in things like employee resource groups and equality groups that can help promote the ideas that are important to certain subsets of our organization? And then also taking that a step further, how do you actually think about your workforce strategy? Are you really going to stay aligned with maybe, you know, certain areas of the country where it's actually more difficult to find diversity? Or are you willing to take the next step and say, I'm going to purposefully invest in other parts of the country, other parts of the world, because I will have a better chance and a higher probability of finding a more diverse talent base? So it's really all of that I think comes into how we at Salesforce are really trying to tackle the issue of diversity and inclusion. But for me, it's the most important thing, because no matter which industry we're in, we are all in a hunt for talent. We are in a competitive environment, even with COVID, even with kind of the recent uptick in unemployment. You know, the war for talent has never been more competitive than it is right now. And so, you know, really, if you think if you're a company and you're going to, for whatever reason, purposefully ignore a subset of our human capital base, you're doing yourself a massive disservice by taking that initiative and using that strategy. It's really about, how do you find the best individuals, the best talent out there, regardless of demographics, regardless of gender, race, you name it. It's about finding the right people who will come into your organization and also attract others to come into that organization so that you could succeed in the future. And Linda, I think you're still on mute.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. John, let's go ahead and let's hear from you, because I think Sam, you know, you spoke for the technology, and there's so many APIs in technology. John, you know, financial services, there's a lot of APIs in financial services. Let's love to hear from you on your perspective on this effort as well too.
Yeah, you know, I would say Mercersbergen is both, you know, in the financial but supply chain as well, pharmaceutical supply chain. So, you know, from our standpoint, I I think that historically we had informal good intentions in terms of our diversity efforts, and certainly in terms of APA, we actually were did quite well in our top 15, 20 executives. We had 2 APAs, and then in certain areas of our business, a lot of APAs, especially in our IT area, which is heavily led by people of South Asian descent, especially. I think with the COVID environment, and then in the face of that, all of the social justice issues that have arisen, it's actually been really an opportunity for us. We've really taken that to heart. And a number of our leaders, myself and our Chief Human Resources Officer, our CEO, really decided in the face of some of the events over the summer to really start to make a more formalized commitment towards different action steps that we take to promote diversity and inclusion, and really try to address the issue of how do we increase the number of underrepresented groups in our associate ranks as a whole, but as well in our leadership. I've actually been on some panels where we've talked about this and was asked whether there's a real opportunity for change or whether this is just a moment in time. And I actually think, for my company at least, there's really an opportunity for us to make some more lasting change, because we really are, we're especially focused on our Black and Brown employees especially, but for APAs, it's also important. For a long time, we didn't have an employee resource group for APAs, and I've been pushing for that, and now we do, and it's, I think, going to be a very successful and very large group. And there's a lot of excitement around that. There's a lot of discussion around how we as APAs can be allies to African American associates. How can we help the promotion of diversity and inclusion across the company? And people are really energized, both white associates and minority associates, men, women, are really excited about it in a way that I've been really pleasantly surprised. I think people, again, within the company have taken it to heart, and I've heard that at other companies that's been happening as well. So, the proof will be in actual action as opposed to good words. But certainly for us in our coming fiscal year, we're starting to talk about what sort of actionable goals we can set for people around the issues of diversity and inclusion. I think the challenge for us as APAs is to figure out how do we both help facilitate this progress, but also make sure that in an appropriate way, our group is also appropriately taking advantage of the opportunity that will come from this, in a way that's not a zero-sum game, that's a gain for everyone.
Great. And I think that that's what all of us want, is something that all of us can equally and equitably enjoy and take part in and benefit from. Actually, I think I'm looking at, time has just gone by so fast. I think what I'm going to do is, if it's okay, Matt, Susan, and Swami, I'm not going to ask you to address the question that we've just been talking about. Swami, there's a question that has come in for you, and I want to make sure that we get to it. And there's a couple other questions that I want to make sure that we get to as well, too. So Swami, someone has asked, do you believe young AAPIs ought to be innovative and create something new in order to rise up in the ranks?
It's a great question. I think one of the things especially people don't realize about innovation is innovation looks very rosy in the rear view mirror. So, but it actually is a very messy process while working through it. Kind of looks like a lot of hard work through the days and months and years. And later when you see the output, it kind of looks like, wow, we created and we changed the industry and so forth. So it's kind of easy to characterize to say you need to create something big to raise in the ranks, but reality is you don't realize when you are doing certain things on a daily basis or even weekly or monthly basis that you are on to something big that is going to change. And so the actionable thing I would probably tell anyone I mentor is it's super important that we actually, even in the technology field, sometimes stop. It's not about chasing one technology versus another, but stay focused on what is the big customer benefit or what we are trying to solve, and work backwards to what is the game-changing thing we need to do in our organization to help the customer we are trying to solve, and then continue to obsess over it and iterate. If you did that, naturally you are going to build something really creative, really durable that actually makes long-lasting impact in your industry. And that is, those are some of the common things you see across the board in what we have done in AWS, but across various product companies, how they started. They all started a seed of probably small ideas that actually they constantly iterate by focusing on customer, and they turned out to be big when you look back 10 years down the line. So that's, hope that kind of gives a color.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I think it's a good reminder that it's not always the new shiny things, but sometimes staying focused on even the tried and true, or just kind of making sure that whatever you're doing is going to be aligned, and finding maybe those ways to innovate even within the kind of frameworks that the company is really trying to solve for, is what I'm hearing. Matt, I'm going to turn to you on this question that came in around microaggressions. And I'm not saying that you're going to be the expert on this, but the question has been asked, have you experienced it? And I'm particularly interested in hearing what you might say, because you're in Detroit, but you know, being GM Ventures, I'm sure you're working with a lot of the technology companies. You're traveling around, or we're traveling around in a lot of different places. So what has been your experience in terms of microaggressions, and how have you handled those when it comes up?
I guess microaggression is a bit of a new term for me, but I'll try to, I think, understand it in the spirit of what the question is all about. I think at the end of the day, you know, there are differences that exist across the spectrum whenever you deal with different people or different organizations. I think the key is to really make sure that you're very thoughtful in terms of where you want to go or what you think the solution is, and be able to be confident, express that confidence, and really sort of stand up for yourself. At the end of the day, you know, I think what gets us furthest along is really to be able to operate in an environment of mutual respect. That means respecting other people's differences and their opinions, but also making sure that others respect you for your opinions and for your thoughts. So I'd rather not really talk about the issue of microaggression, but really talk about how we really ought to be working to interact with other folks. You know, I'd like to maybe take just a minute or so, though, to sort of help address or help maybe provide sort of my views on the previous question that you had around innovation, because innovation is such a, you know, such a central topic, right, in terms of what I'm responsible for in our organization. But what I tell my researchers and engineers is really, you know, the issue really isn't necessarily about innovation. Innovation certainly is a great path to get recognition in the company. If you do something really fantastic and that's really new, that's fantastic. That really gives you recognition. But I think the focus is really, how do you deliver value at the end of the day? And there are many, many ways to deliver value to the company. And it starts by really, you know, focusing not only perhaps on your own roles and your own job, but to really think a little bit bigger. Think about what the company's mission is. Think about its customers. Think about its purpose. Think about the strategies. Ask intelligent questions and give intelligent suggestions. I think as we begin to really, you know, try to expand our perspective and our horizon, we learn a lot more. but we also contribute a lot more throughout that process. So I'd like to sort of share those thoughts with the audience. Thank you.
That was fantastic. I really like that answer in terms of how do you deliver value to the company. And I think sometimes, especially if you're younger, you don't really see how much your role is part of a bigger kind of system, but it's also integral. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been hired. I mean, everybody has something important to really, contribute in this case. And I think that that's something to remember. Susan, I know that you're going to have to leave in just a few minutes, so I want to ask you one more question before we leave, and I think that this is something that maybe is just a good reminder about why perhaps representation is important. But what from your perspective, what are the benefits and the positive impacts of having AAPI executive leaders who are present and visible and vocal in positions of decision-making and policy-making at a company?
Well, I mean, first of all, the phrase, you can't be what you can't see. I think that regardless of whether the AAPI executive is going to be engaged with other AAPIs or not, that person makes an impact by being where they are, because there's still right, we're still now in a position, and I think maybe Silicon Valley may be an exception because there's more of us visibly in positions of power. But everywhere else, we still are more exceptional. So our mere presence is really important for people to envision that they too can be where we are. I think that's number one. Number two, if you do have that opportunity to be that role model, then it's important for us to give back and to remember what it was like for us growing up and coming up, and how amazing it would have been if we had somebody like us who understands where we're coming from, who looks like us, who's had the experiences that we have, to be able to guide us and to be our mentors and to be our sponsors. I feel that we do have an obligation to give back. Now, I don't think we should only give back to AAPIs, by the way. I think we ought to be giving back to young people and people that are younger in their career period. And we should help to create a talent pipeline. But in particular, where there is underrepresentation, we really need to do even more. And that means, that I should be a mentor and I should be a role model for African-American, Hispanic, all different underrepresented individuals, because I feel that is one of the things that I should be doing in my position. I should use that. I should leverage that. I also think, seeing one of the chat comments about the model minority, I mean, that's one way to dispel these myths. I mean, the model minority myth, remember, was created not to complement us, but to pit us against other minorities, in particular Blacks, to make them feel like they're not doing enough and that they're complaining too much and that they're outspoken and not working hard enough. So let's remember that. Number two, the model minority myth is based on stereotypes. And the way we break down stereotypes is exactly, I think, what Matt and others have said on the panel today, which is people need to get to know you. And then they start to not think about you as that Asian guy, that woman. They start to think of you as that worker, that executive, that person who's contributing to the team. The more they get to know you, the more these myths, these stereotypes fall aside and be replaced with real life experience, with real life people. And so, that would be my answer, my long-winded answer to your question and my answer to the question that I made up for myself. But please give back if you're in a position to do so. And it doesn't matter what level you're at. If you're at the entry level, there is somebody in high school that's looking up at you and saying, I didn't know I could do that, but thank you, now I know I can. So we can be mentors and role models for people no matter where we are.
And thank you so much for answering that question. And I think that especially the part about, giving back, each one of us and each one of the people that are on this call, we have this opportunity to give back. And I think to also do so in a way that, enables us to be proud of who we are and also reminding ourselves of I think John had talked about obligation. I think that was a really important point. I think that probably is something that even though it may not be part of your top three, is probably something that threads through all of our stories as well too. John, I want to ask you, I mean, Susan brought this up about being mentors, and I want to just ask if I could just ask you to just answer real briefly and quickly about what do you look for because you've been in a lot of different organizations, what do you look for when you look to mentor and even sponsor somebody? And by sponsoring, you know, you're putting your name, your capital behind them by vouching for them. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I think about younger people that I've mentored, and actually a lot of people I've sort of built up. Part of what I think is, you know, we were talking about how do you rise up, and I think that networking and developing your skill at networking and building your networks is key. And in a way, as a mentor, I'm thinking a little bit the same way. So I mean, obviously, one, I want to be able to relate to the person. So interpersonal skill is important because I want to mentor someone who's got some interpersonal acuity, or at least some willingness to develop it, because that's going to help them to network and do some of the other things that they need to do to really respond to mentoring and really, you know, take their talents and build them. But I think, you know, ultimately, I would say that's probably what I look for a lot. Just someone who has a willingness and a desire to interpersonally, you know, to interact with people, and who wants to develop that skill, because I think that's a soft skill that probably is, together with communication, which we talked about. I think those are the two most important things to help you rise up, and, you know, beyond, probably more important almost than working hard or anything else, interpersonal skills and speaking well. And that's sort of what I look for when I'm, or the willingness to develop those areas when I'm looking for someone to mentor.
Great, thank you so much. And I've been given we're getting to the time's up area or time frame part of this conversation. So I'm going to ask each of you, perhaps in 30 seconds or less, can you, actually it's got to be less than 30 seconds, 15 seconds or less, can you just give me your last maybe word of wisdom that you want to give to everybody who has signed on with us today? So Matt, I'm going to start with you, or actually, no, I take that back. Sam, let's go to you first.
Well, thanks, Linda. And again, just really appreciate the opportunity to come share my thoughts and really get to meet all the amazing folks on this panel and to talk to all of you. I come back again to the thing that I think Susan talked about earlier. It really is about confidence. It really is about you being okay stepping out into maybe something that is uncomfortable, but using that as a way to, you know, to constantly leverage the things that you've learned to challenge yourself as an individual, and to know that you have overcome a lot. And by virtue of doing that, you have a tremendous amount of skills and capabilities that you can tap into any point in time to help you in the future. And always, I think, to this last point, like, I think it's so important that we reach out to others who can help us. That's sometimes very difficult to do. There is a show of actually courage, in my opinion, to when you do reach out for help and you do actually go find other resources that can provide you with things that you may not have right now, and that may help you in your path. And so give yourself the latitude to be able to express that courage and to reach out to those of us and others who can help you in any way we can.
Awesome, thank you so much. Let's go to Matt.
Yeah, so I want to take the opportunity, first of all, to thank you, Linda, for an excellent job moderating this session. I also want to thank all the participants, because I think by your engagement and participation, it really demonstrates that you're taking a very, very strong step in terms of working on your self-development and how to really perhaps find some good tips and ideas in terms of how to advance your careers. But on the general topic of diversity and inclusion, I think we as a society have been making progress over the last decades, but we have a long way to go. And I'm certainly looking forward to the day when inclusion is really second nature, that we are all really judged by what we are able to contribute and what we are as individuals. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
I would just say, I think, be true to yourself. You've come to the table with your background, with all the things that make you who you are. And I think the key is to just tap the parts that are going to be useful, and then don't be afraid to fail, because all of us have failed along the way. And the only way to succeed over time is to take risk and to be willing to fail and get up and try again. So just be yourself and be brave.
All right. Swami?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. I actually felt like I learned a lot listening to the panel, and I would just echo what I heard many of them say. Number one, be constantly learning. You're never done, and lifelong learning is an important trait. Number two, I think we need to stop obsessing over short-term successes and be bold enough to fail and fail fast, like what John said. And it's super important, but it's equally important to, on failure, reflect on them and learn to iterate and pivot. And also, I echo what Matt said. He put it quite eloquently, which is broaden your perspective all the time, not just thinking through what is your job at this given moment. Instead, what is it that globally an organization or the company is trying to achieve in terms of the business outcome or the customer benefit. And final one is give back at whatever level, what Linda, you mentioned, irrespective of whether you're a college grad or actually a new employee or actually an executive and so forth. I mean, these are the four things I would probably call out. So.
Great, thank you so much. And for everyone else, Susan has put her tip into the chat. I'm going to turn this over to Madeline. Thank you very much for a wonderful conversation. This was really fabulous. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Linda. And thanks to all the panelists for sharing their stories and advice with us today. Thanks again to our panel sponsors, Amazon Web Services, AmerisourceBergen, General Motors, and Salesforce. Up next in our Legislative Leadership Series, join us this Thursday, September 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern for our panel on immigration, an AAPI issue, where we'll hear from AAPI immigration policy experts. We'll have 2 more panels for you every week through the rest of this month, so check out the APEX website to learn more about the remaining policy discussions and sign up. We also invite you to join us for APEX Celebration because Asian Prom is going virtual. Register so that you can join us on October the 1st. You can RSVP to participate in all of these exciting events by visiting the APEX website at www.apex.org. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.